Wow, this house is cute. But can I really get in the game in this economy? I do have savings, and I am responsible-ish. Ugh, I should bury it. I'm being wild. But what if I'm not being wild, though? Could I actually score a...
Kick off your home buying journey with Zillow's new BuyAbility tool. It makes it easy to find out what you can afford, so you can get off the bench and onto the playing field with confidence. Check your BuyAbility, only on Zillow.
Today at T-Mobile, I'm joined by a special co-anchor.
What up, everybody? It's your boy, Big Snoop Double G.
Snoop, where can people go to find great deals?
Head to T-Mobile.com and get 4 iPhone 16s with Apple Intelligence on us, plus 4 lines for $25.
That's quite a deal, Snoop. And when you switch to T-Mobile, you can save versus the other big guys' comparable plans plus streaming.
Respect. We up out of here.
See how you can save on wireless and streaming versus the other big guys at T-Mobile.com/switch. Apple Intelligence requires iOS 18.1 or later.
Wonder-working power in the precious...
Incredible as they seem, are not the results of mass hysteria.
You may wish to adjust the dial. You're currently tuned into the wrong station.
Come on! Weave, for Christ's sake! Oh, fuck. You have money on that? Well, good. Stupid thing to do. Are you even fond of the blood sport, or just happen to be here tonight? Yeah. Oh, Christ. I saw this coming before the fight even started. Did you see the guys in this corner? Just fucking standing there like they're at the counter waiting for lunch. No plan, no presents. How's a guy supposed to win with no backup, huh? Me? Fight? No. Well, I did junior circuit for a few years, but no, I never fought pro. Though I did work at a gym for a few years while I was at college. Did a bit of training. Other boxers, I mean. And I apprenticed as a Cutman for a few years after that. Before I decided it wasn't for me. A Cutman? A Cutman is, well, boxing is a brutal sport. You get nosebleeds, you get swelling, you get cut, and things like that, blood in the eye, blood down your throat. They can take you out of a fight long before you get knocked out. That's where your Cutman comes in. The second the bell rings, the round is over. They're in that corner with cotton swabs, a cold compress, and whatever proprietary cocktail of anticoagulants they've mixed up. Whatever it takes to get their fighter back out in the ring. Of course, they're not really doctors, and it's not really medicine. On the contrary, you're patching your guy up so you can send him back out there to get hurt some more. But nothing that they didn't sign up for. If no boxer ever took a punch, he wouldn't need Cutman at all. That's, something my mentor used to say. No, he's probably still saying it. Now, he was truly something. Maybe the best there's ever been. In my opinion. I'd say that the man could stop a laceration just by looking at it. But that'd be doing him a discredit. There was nothing magical about his skills. It was just pure science. He'd probably hate it if he knew I was talking about him like this. I mean, he didn't even like people knowing his name. Didn't want to draw attention to himself, didn't want to distract. The problem there, though, is that he simply became known as the Cutman, which wasn't much better. Other corners feared him. Even the other boxer would. His mere presence would strike a psychological blow before the fight even began, because anyone who knew anything knew that whatever punches they threw, whatever damage they did, would be undone by that man's golden hands. Or at least it would seem that way on the surface, because he was just a man. But they didn't know that, and breaking a boxer's spirit is half the battle. And that is who taught me. Not that I was great or anything. I was good, because I did exactly what he told me to do. Anybody would be at least fine if they did that. But I never had the... I never had what made him so great. I studied under him for about 3 years. While I was still at the gym, one of our boxers had a national title match and hired the Cutman to help sweeten the odds. We won, of course, and in the process, the Cutman took a quiet liking to me. I was good at taking direction, quick on my feet, and I had steady hands. Took me under his wing after that, and it was a busy time in my life. I saw a lot of fights, good fights, and we won most of them, which meant a decent bit of scratch, too. A Cutman takes their pay out of the prize winner's purse, and even the morsels that trickled down to me were enough to pay rent and buy groceries. So then, why did I stop? If we were winning, if I was making a living, if I was well on my way to taking what I'd learned and making a career for myself... Well, I have to tell you about the last fight I ever worked to explain that. Jimmy DaCosta, super welterweight ranker, was going up against the WBC number 2 in the division. You ever heard of Jimmy DaCosta? Maybe not. He never fought in a world title match, but he had a few big fights. Ben Curry, John the Hammer Hatton. Though, he didn't get many chances to headline. I liked Jimmy. Friendly guy, good sense of humor. And utterly tenacious, just completely fearless. Qualities which sometimes did him more harm than good. See, Jimmy was a bit of a hammer, a slugger through and through, and the crowds that did come out to his fights loved him for it. But there would be times that the guy would take twice as many punches as he gave. It's a miracle his career lasted as long as it did. So, being a fighter who prided himself on the vicious beatings he could take while giving some of his own right back, naturally he needed a good Cutman. Someone to make sure he wasn't disqualified when he took a cut above the eye. Someone to bring down the swelling so he could actually see the guy he was trying to hit. That'd be us. Him. I'd already worked in his corner for 3 fights before, but this was a big one. You could feel the excitement and electricity. You could smell the desperation in the air. If he won this one, he'd be number 2 in the rankings, a hair away from challenging for the belt. And like I said, Jimmy's path there had been a brutal one. The sad truth is that some boxers just don't last as long in the sport as others. And Jimmy didn't have much time. So, with the fights his body had left, he wanted to prove that he was a contender, someone to be taken seriously, more than a punching bag. It was a lot on the line. And it certainly wasn't going to be easy. We were up against Samuel Sloan. Now, maybe there's a name you've heard of. This was back when he was still climbing up the ranks, but even then, everyone in the business knew that he was the real deal. A lean, brutally efficient exemplar of the sweet science. A genius, with thunder in his gloves. The oddsmakers didn't have it in our favor. Even I was scratching my head trying to think of a scenario where Jimmy could pull this out. Up until we were walking out into the hall. Lights on us, music blaring, the crowd cheering. But when I looked over to the Cutman, he was steady. Not that I ever seen him be anything other than steady, but I don't know. It just seemed like such an uphill battle. But he was still ice cold. Tight, thin lips and dark, crisp, sensible sunglasses hiding any emotion. Hardly a bead of sweat was dripping from his big head, sprinkled with that tight crop of salt and pepper. And I still don't know if that's because he had no doubts in his mind that Jimmy would win, or whether it's because he knew that the coin would fall as it may, and there was no calling it for sure, and it was just his job to skew those chances as best he could. But either way, it made me steady. Jimmy had climbed up into the ring. The ref was giving him and Sloan instructions. There wasn't time for any more niggling doubts. We had a job to do. There was one last, slow, long moment for me to take it all in. The crowd had worked themselves up into a frenzy, but in this moment, I couldn't hear them. There were only the lights and the vibrations. I didn't know then that this was going to be my last time there at the center of things, in the mix of it all, and, like I said, I tried to push my doubts to the side. but there was still something foreboding in the air. The bell rang. Jimmy rushed out of his corner in a headlong charge. Sloane glided forward to meet him, easily avoiding the first salvo Jimmy sent his way. My eyes stayed fixed on the two of them. Win or lose, this was always how it was going to start. Sloane was quicker on his feet and had 2.5 inches on us. He dove and ducked out of the way of each of Jimmy's hard punches, peppering him with small, quick jabs for his trouble. Jabs that had put down lesser boxers in the past. Jimmy, though, he was tough. A couple of lefts weren't going to put him down. Though as the first round carried on, his problem became apparent. See, it doesn't matter how much guts you've got. Take enough punches to the face and you're going to swell up. Skin and tissue don't know anything about guts. After 3 minutes, the bell rang again, and Jimmy came back to us, red and beaten. But, again, this was always how it was going to start. We didn't say anything. The Cutman didn't say anything. That's the coach's job. The Cutman just got to work. I handed him the end swell. That's a piece of metal with a handle you keep on ice. You use it to apply pressure, stop the blood flow. The Cutman, of course, had a full custom set he'd brought with him, perfectly contoured to the direct proportions of Jimmy's face, and he'd instructed me beforehand which would be needed for which spots. In this case, the area above and around Jimmy's right eye, where he'd taken the brunt of those jabs. He worked quickly. He had to. The seconds were ticking down. The redness around that eye would turn to puffy swelling eventually, but that process could be slowed down. He pressed hard. He knew exactly where each of the blood vessels in the face were, and which best to apply pressure to. A few seconds left. The end swell came off, a quick but precise smear of Vaseline. The ref called for seconds out. The bell rang.
Halliday presents, in the red corner, the undisputed, undefeated Weed Whacker Guy! Champion of hurling grass and pollen everywhere! And in the blue corner, the challenger, extra strength Halliday! Eye drops that work all day to prevent the release of histamines that cause itchy allergy eyes. And the winner, by knockout, is Halliday! Halliday, bring it on!
I can say to my new Samsung Galaxy S25 Ultra, hey, find a keto-friendly restaurant nearby and text it to Beth and Steve. And it does, without me lifting a finger. So I can get in more squats anywhere I can. 1, 2, 3.
Will that be cash or credit?
Credit. 4.
Galaxy S25 Ultra, the AI companion that does the heavy lifting so you can do you. Get yours at Samsung.com. Compatible with select apps. Requires Google Gemini account. Results may vary based on input. Check responses for accuracy.
The second round went much like the first, though here and there Jimmy found his own rhythm, got a few punches into the body, strong, sapping punches. But not nearly enough to shift the difference. Sloane's conditioning was something else. He had enough stamina to take those body shots, and he knew it. Not that I'm saying he was cocky, though. When Jimmy managed to get in there, he kept the guard around his face tight, enduring the pain precisely because he knew what a shot to the head from Jimmy could do. And eventually, without fail, he'd find a way to slip out after a few seconds and land a few more clean jabs, most of which found their way to Jimmy's right eye. The bell rang again, and as Jimmy's fight was put on hold, our fight against biology began anew. And now, the fight physician was hovering over us. How many clean hits had Jimmy taken already? 5 dozen? 6? The doctor loomed, trying to gauge Jimmy's condition as we iced him down. But the doctor also knew that this was the Cutman, and even if Jimmy was starting to look rough, he didn't look as rough as he could have. So for now, the doctor backed off, and that too was part of the Cutman's power. He could make a pile of pounded hamburger meat look like it was in fighting shape. And he had. The fight continued, and round after round the strategies unfolded. Our side's plan was simple, but it was really the best we could do with the tools Jimmy had. Trying to land those vicious body shots, trying to wear Sloane down, disrupt his breath, get him to drop that guard. All the while, the Cutman warding off a torrent of blood, thick and thin, realigning a cracked nose, extracting a chipped-off chunk of tooth. After he'd taken nearly 100 punches, I stopped counting. In the fourth, Jimmy's mouthguard had come out, and he'd sliced his tongue on the exposed root. The Cutman clamped it to stop the flow, then just gave a jut of the chin that said, "Swallow the rest." I helped as much as possible. Mostly, I made sure I wasn't in the way. Jimmy, the Cutman, me. It was the best we could do. And against a different fighter, it could have worked. I'm sad to say, though, that Sloan was a higher caliber of athlete. The coach had bet on Jimmy's power over Sloan's resilience, and we were losing that bet. Meanwhile, the other corner strategy had nearly come to full fruition. A clean, safe, sure strategy born out of their fighters' natural gifts. Sloan's assault on that right eye had been relentless. In truth, Sloan had been slowing down as the fight carried on. His damage was affecting him, just not nearly as much as Jimmy's was, or as rapidly. After round 5, that eye was nearly swollen shut. Still, though, the Cutman stayed cool and calm, making the best of it, swabs and epinephrine ready for the cuts that began erupting from the swollen, purple flesh. The doctor's faith in the Cutman certainly kept them from ending the fight in a disqualification, but it was all the same to Sloan's side. By the end of round 6, Jimmy's right eye and his fate had been sealed. It came in the last few moments, right before the bell. There's this strange sensation you get during a fight, even when you're just watching from the sideline. This palpable sense of bloodlust just before someone goes in for the kill. A turn in the air that comes ahead of any other indication, like the taste of metal on your tongue. Sloan threw a jab, though not like the others. Not to strike, but just to check the distance. His right fist, the one he'd been holding back for the whole match, tightened, and stepping forward, he let loose a blinding right cross. But Jimmy wasn't an idiot. He saw it coming and he tightened his guard, just enough that it couldn't get through. But I guess he couldn't hear the coach, and he couldn't see 2 steps ahead. Because not a half a second later, Sloan's fist came cracking into the side of Jimmy's head. Not the right, which pulled back after a perfectly executed feint, but Sloan's left, a brutal hook into Jimmy's blind spot. Jimmy staggered. Sloan was already walking away. And that was it, I thought. And that should have been it. For Jimmy's own sake, that should have been it. But somehow, he stayed on his feet. He managed to raise his gloves, and as the clock ran down to 0, the bell for the round rang. Sloan looked bothered as Jimmy stumbled back into our corner. The crowd around us now whipped up into a frenzy from this death blow met with a heroic refusal to go down. But ultimately, he seemed unconcerned. Even if the round had ended, surely the fight would be stopped. At least, I can only imagine that's what he was thinking. Jimmy collapsed into his seat. The coach asked him if he could still go on, whether he still remembered the plan, as though he didn't look like the victim of a car crash. The Cutman started working immediately, cleaning blood and applying gels. But then, he stopped. The Cutman, I mean. His hands were still, and he was just staring at Jimmy. Was this it, I thought? Were we going to call it? But then I realized he wasn't staring at Jimmy, the person. He was looking intently at Jimmy, the thing, the object, the pile of hamburger meat before him. It was, well, I wasn't sure right at that moment, but the area around his eye, around where he'd taken that hook. This was already deeply strange to me, seeing him so still, but it became even more strange. He spoke, in a quiet, dry voice that cut through the air. The coach, in the middle of imploring a half-conscious Jimmy to remember the basics, stopped. He was as stunned as I was. 4 words was all he said. End of this round. Jimmy looked up, finally, at the Cutman standing over him. It seemed that there was a moment of understanding, and he gave a slight nod. It was heavy and knowing, but only known to the 2 of them. And with that, the Cutman's hands got back to work, doing something else I'd never seen before. He took his thumb and sort of mashed it into Jimmy's brow, where he'd been looking before, near the eye. The coach looked to me, but I was as clueless as he was. Well, nearly as clueless. A moment later, the physician came over, from the other side, where Sloane's team had almost certainly been petitioning them to end the match. Can he go on? The doctor should have been asking Jimmy this, but instead he asked the Cutman, deferring to his obvious expertise. Perhaps if they'd inspected Jimmy themselves, they'd have seen what the Cutman had. But they didn't, and the Cutman simply nodded. The doctor looked intently at the Cutman, but there was nothing on that face to see. Their eyes then drifted up and around. The crowd were stamping their feet. The cheers were reaching a fever pitch. "Let them fight!" they cried. Some called out Jimmy's name, some Sloane's. But really, they all wanted the same thing. A knockout. Perhaps getting a bit swept up in things. That's what the doctor wanted too. They nodded back to the Cutman, then turned and nodded to the ref. The ref called for seconds out. Sloane's coach screamed in protest, but it fell on deaf ears. Jimmy rose somehow, and the bell rang. He lurched forward. He was bashed up and beyond bloody, but step by step he made his way toward his opponent. And Sloane, he looked horrified. It was like looking at the face of a man who had just seen a ghost. Or a homicide. And maybe that shock, that hesitation, is how he let Jimmy slip into range. Maybe it's why his hands were down when they shouldn't have been. But before he knew it, Jimmy DaCosta's right hand was rocketing towards him like an artillery shell. Sloane instinctively threw a counter. A left counter, his look of horror ratcheting all the way up to terror. But it was too little too late. The blows landed simultaneously, and even though Jimmy was barely standing himself, he knocked Sloane clear off his feet and down onto the mat. The hall erupted with cheers. As the referee rose from checking on the man laying face down, you could barely hear the bell ring as he waved his arms, calling the match to a stop. I was screaming too. I couldn't believe it. Not a minute earlier, I'd thought we'd been finished. And now a decisive reversal KO after rounds of punishment. Grit overcoming talent. What a fight! What a story! I looked at the Cutman. He hadn't given up. He'd pushed Jimmy to the brink. Well past the brink. And Jimmy had gone right along with him. Jimmy stood there in the middle of the ring now, with his back to us. He must have been taking it all in. The victory, the crowd's love. He was gazing up, his arms slack. And then he fell to his knees, then drooped forward the rest of the way. The doctor rushed forward to take a look at him, only seconds later calling for a stretcher. They had to scream over the crowd to be heard, and even then you could barely make it out. As they carried him away, I tried in vain to understand what was going on, so I turned back to my mentor, to the Cutman, for anything. But I saw nothing. Not a calm, cool expression. Not even a blank one. What I saw was not the face of a man, but simply a void, barren of anything I could draw emotion or sentiment from. Good work, the void said. We'll win cleaner next time. Jimmy DaCosta was dead before they got him to the locker room. He was probably dead before they'd even gotten him out of the hall. His right orbital had been completely shattered, and it seemed that somehow, they said, a long, thin sliver of bone had twisted its way around and been driven right into his brain. A freak accident, 1 in a million chance. And when I heard those details, a lot more things made sense. Sloane had looked like he'd seen a ghost, because he had. He'd felt the feedback of that left hook, the one that had cracked Jimmy's skull into dozens of tiny pieces. He knew what kind of damage he'd done. The fight should have been ended. And that last counter jab, the one that likely drove the bone shard to deadly depth, well, there was no helping that. Worries for your opponent's health aside, you can't just undo years spent honing one's instincts. Though I don't think anyone blames Sam Sloan anyway. No. If only the fracture had been caught earlier. If only someone had seen the tip of that sliver poking its way out of Jimmy's brow. The doctor might have been able to do something about it. But, like I said, a Cutman isn't really a doctor. They can't be, you see. A doctor swears an oath to do no harm. But a Cutman swears no such thing. Their oath is to the goddess of victory. And some take that to greater lengths than others. I couldn't go to those lengths. I liked Jimmy. Though, I understand that Jimmy wanted to win, to prove something. And he did. Number 2 in the rankings. Probably the best he would have ever done. And he knew it. The Cutman gave that to him when they struck a bargain in that moment. A win. A hero's death. I couldn't have done that for him. But he could. And that's why he's the best. The Wrong Station is made possible with the generous support of our listeners on Patreon. Patrons can listen to The Wrong Station ad-free, as well as get access to bonus episodes, discussions, and more. This week's episode, Cutman, was written and performed by Anthony Botelho. Thank you to Courtney Boyer, Matthew Delahaye, Violent Zach, Adam Gomez, Matt, and a very special thanks to Benjamin Corey and Jonathan Hatton for helping us keep the lights, well, off. The Wrong Station is co-produced by Alexander Saxton, Anthony Botelho, and Jacob Duarte Spiel, with music composed and performed on the piano by Ilan Citrin, and arranged for the viola and performed by Viola Schmid. You can follow The Wrong Station on Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram, and email us at thewrongstation@gmail.com. And until next time, thank you for listening.